I walked into courtroom 3B just before the session started, scanning the room with a calm, practiced gaze. Wood-paneled walls, rows of stiff benches, and a raised bench where the judge would soon preside. I took a seat near the back, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid attention, for now. I was here on assignment. Unannounced. My name is Simone Harper. Department of Justice, Internal Oversight Division. This courtroom, this judge, and this case were on my radar after multiple complaints hinted at serious procedural misconduct. But I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to watch. Judge Ronald E. Mathers entered the room with his usual flair, black robe swishing, his voice carrying more arrogance than authority. The hearing began. From the first few minutes, I saw why I'd been sent. He interrupted the defense counsel constantly, but gave the prosecution unlimited leeway. He mocked the accused. Rolled his eyes. Scoffed at objections. It was all on record now. I took mental notes and subtle ones on my tablet. But then his eyes landed on me. He paused. "You," he said sharply, pointing toward the back. "Who are you with?" I stayed seated, calm. "I'm observing, Your Honor." His face flushed. "This courtroom is not a public gallery for casual visitors. If you don't have business here, you can wait outside." "I do have business," I said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. He didn't like that. "Then state your name and affiliation." "Now." I remained seated. "That's not necessary at the moment, Your Honor," I replied. That was when it happened. His voice thundered. "Bailiff, remove this woman. I don't allow disruptions in my court." People turned. The room hushed. The bailiff hesitated. I stood up slowly and reached into my blazer. That was when everything changed. I moved with practiced control, slow, deliberate, no sudden motions. From inside my blazer, I pulled out a slim black wallet. I flipped it open and raised it just high enough for the bailiff, and the judge, to see the badge and ID inside. Simone Harper. Department of Justice. Internal Oversight Division. The courtroom went silent. The bailiff stopped mid-step, his hands frozen in the air. Judge Mathers blinked, his mouth slightly open. He looked from my badge to my face, back to the badge. "I'm here under federal authorization," I said. Quietly. Or at least, I was trying to be. Murmurs began among the spectators and attorneys. The court reporter's fingers hovered uncertainly over her keyboard. "I wasn't notified of any DOJ presence today," Mathers said, his voice tightening. "That was intentional," I replied calmly. "Oversight works best when it's unannounced." His jaw clenched. I could see the internal panic behind his eyes as the reality set in. He had just tried to eject a federal officer from his courtroom. I walked forward, all eyes following. "Shall we proceed with the hearing, Your Honor?" I asked, stopping short of the bench. "Or would you prefer to take a recess?" He swallowed hard. 10-minute recess, he muttered, almost choking on the words. "Court is in recess." The gavel hit the wood, but it didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like retreat. I stood still as the attorneys whispered to each other and the crowd began shifting. The judge disappeared behind his chamber door without making eye contact. The show was over, for now. But the real work had just begun. 10 minutes turned into 20. I waited near the defense table, nodding politely at the court clerk and ignoring the curious glances from the attorneys. No one spoke to me directly, they weren't sure if they should. That's how it usually goes when the DOJ shows up uninvited. Then a side door opened behind the bench. The bailiff stepped out and approached me cautiously. "Judge Mathers would like to speak with you privately, in chambers," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "That's highly irregular." I was told to ask. I glanced at my watch. "Fine. 2 minutes." The door stays open. He nodded, clearly relieved. I followed him past the heavy oak door and into Judge Mather's chambers. The room was lined with bookshelves and dimly lit by a single green desk lamp. Judge Mather stood near the window, his back to me. He turned slowly. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something tight and uncertain. "Agent Harper," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "Had I known you were coming, I would've." "You weren't supposed to know," I interrupted. "Your courtroom was selected for live oversight based on multiple red flags, disproportionate case dismissals, prosecutorial favoritism, and complaints filed by your own staff." His face twitched. "That's absurd," he said quickly. "Unfounded accusations by disgruntled employees, they were flagged by 3 separate departments. Civil rights, criminal division, and yes, judicial conduct," I said coolly. "Today was your opportunity to show they were wrong. And instead, I tried to throw you out," he muttered. "You did more than that," I said. "You made your instinctual response clear. And I'll be including it in my report." He stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, is there any way we can talk about this? Off the record?" I stared at him for a long moment. Then shook my head. "You're a judge, sir. You should know better than to ask that." I turned to leave. Behind me, I heard him whisper, almost to himself, "This is going to destroy me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When I stepped back into the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The defense attorney glanced up at me with a look of cautious respect. The prosecutor avoided eye contact entirely. Observers in the gallery leaned in closer, trying to decipher what had just happened behind the scenes. The bailiff re-entered a few moments later and announced, "Court will reconvene." Judge Mathers followed behind him, but he wasn't the same man who had stormed in earlier. His shoulders were tighter. His gaze flicked nervously across the room. And when he took his seat at the bench, he didn't look down at me again. "Let's resume the matter of State versus Jenkins," he said, voice now measured, almost mechanical. I sat back down without a word. No more interruptions. No raised voices. And, notably, no more favoritism. It was as if a switch had flipped. The case proceeded uneventfully. The judge stuck to procedure. Every objection was ruled on properly. Every motion was considered fairly. I took quiet notes, not just on what was said, but on what wasn't. After court adjourned, I waited near the clerk's desk as the crowd began to disperse. A young woman with tight curls and glasses, clearly an assistant from the public defender's office, cautiously approached me. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I don't mean to intrude, but, was that really DOJ business?" I nodded. "Yes." She bit her lip, glancing toward the judge's now empty bench. "Thank you. A lot of us have been waiting a long time for someone to show up." I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just said, "File your statements. Every one of you. Today." She blinked, then nodded quickly and rushed out. I left the courtroom with a dozen sets of eyes following me. Not out of suspicion. Not out of confusion. Out of hope. But I knew better than to get comfortable. This was only the beginning. Oversight didn't end in the courtroom, it ended in the report. And mine had just started. Back in my hotel room that evening, I opened the DOJ-issued laptop and logged into the secure portal. The clock on the nightstand read 7:42 p.m. I had 3 hours before the system locked me out for the night. I pulled up the template for an internal judicial oversight preliminary report and began to type. Subject, Judge Ronald E. Mathers, Courtroom Observation Summary Date, today, filed by Agent Simone Harper, DOJ Internal Oversight Division 1 laid out the timeline of events with clinical precision. No embellishments. No opinions. Just facts. 10:03 a.m., entered courtroom 3B unannounced. 10:21 a.m., observed inappropriate conduct, repeated interruptions of defense, verbal tone bordering on demeaning. 10:38 a.m., subject ordered federal observer to be removed without cause. 10:39 a.m., identification disclosed. Subject visibly alarmed. 10:41 a.m., recess declared. 10:58 a.m., private conversation requested by subject. Documentation of inappropriate attempt to negotiate off-the-record understanding. 11:14 a.m. to 12 p.m., remainder of proceedings followed protocol, behavior markedly different from initial conduct. I paused, then added a line under the notes section. Note, presence of federal authority prompted immediate behavioral correction, strong indicator of prior awareness of misconduct. After saving my progress, I opened a new folder for evidence. I uploaded my audio recordings, courtroom logs, and copies of public complaints tied to Judge Mathers. There were more than I'd hoped. The last item was a secure message from my supervisor. Just 2 lines, saw the flag come through on Mathers. Good work today. Let me know if he tries to contact you directly. D. Weller. I closed the laptop and leaned back. The job wasn't glamorous. It didn't get headlines. And it never got thanks. But today, one courtroom ran the way it should, if only because someone reminded them they were being watched. Tomorrow, I'd be gone. But the echo of that moment wouldn't be. And neither would my report. By the following week, the ripple had begun. 3 attorneys from that same courthouse sent confidential statements to the DOJ. 2 clerks followed. Each one described incidents that, while different in detail, shared a familiar theme: bias, impatience, pressure to overlook errors. A culture of silence that had lingered for years. But the silence was cracking now. One morning, I received a coded alert in my DOJ inbox. It was brief: subject, secondary action authorized, Judge Ari Mathers initiate Phase 2, formal review panel recommendation. That wasn't the end of the road, it was the beginning of a much longer one. A full investigation. A panel review. Potential suspension. And in extreme cases, removal from the bench. I filed the necessary documents to trigger the next phase, attached every testimony I'd received, and included a sealed note recommending immediate supervision for Judge Mathers until the process concluded. Then I archived the case. A few days later, I was boarding a flight to my next assignment in Texas. New courthouse. New target. New shadows to observe. As I moved down the aisle of the plane, someone called out behind me. "Excuse me. Agent Harper." I turned. It was the young public defender from Courtroom 3B. She was dressed casually now, off duty, but her eyes held that same spark. "I just wanted to say," she said with a quiet, grateful smile, "we all saw what you did. You didn't have to stand your ground like that. But you did." I gave a small nod. "It's part of the job." She tilted her head. "Maybe. But not everyone does it." The plane began to board, and she turned to leave. I watched her go, then looked out the small round window at the runway stretching ahead. In a system that too often looked the other way, all it took was one moment, one decision, to remind people that accountability wasn't a myth. Not when we were watching. 3 months later, I received a final memo in my secure DOJ inbox. Subject: disciplinary action, Judge Ronald E. Mathers. Outcome: voluntary resignation accepted in lieu of formal removal. Notes: no appeal filed. Position to be filled by federal appointment. I stared at the screen in silence. There was no parade. No headlines. Just a quiet resolution tucked away in the back pages of bureaucracy. But it was done. The bench was empty now, not as a punishment, but as a necessary reset. Later that week, an internal DOJ bulletin went out to Oversight Division staff. At the bottom, in fine print, a line caught my attention: Agent Simone Harper's field conduct during the Mathers case set the standard for silent intervention and ethical persistence. Commendation submitted. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because out there in a courtroom I'd never return to, things had changed. Not forever, but for now. And sometimes, that was enough. A judge had tried to push someone out without asking who she was. He never imagined she was the one who'd be deciding his fate. The system blinked. I didn't.